Hello and welcome back to another of GNAT-TV's in-depth series. I'm Andrew McKeever, the news director at GNAT-TV's News Project. It's a pleasure to have you with us today on Tuesday, October 29th. It's also a great pleasure to be joined today by Matt Dunne, who is the founder and executive director of the Center on Rural Innovation, or CORI. Matt will be the keynote speaker at the second Heart of the Shires luncheon, which will be coming up shortly on November 6th at 12 p.m. at the new Lincoln Hall at Hildene. There are still tickets available. You can go to the Southwestern Vermont Chamber of Commerce's website, swvtchamber.com/Heart of the Shires. If you still haven't snagged a ticket yet, there are, I guess, a few left. Before he helped to launch CORI, or the Center on Rural Innovation, Matt served for 11 years in the Vermont House of Representatives and the state Senate. He also helped to grow a Vermont-based software company and served as the associate director of the Rockefeller Center on Public Policy at Dartmouth College. I could go on and on and on about all the work that Matt has done. It's be a fairly long introduction, but I think we might as well just cut to the chase here and say, Matt, welcome back to GNAT. It's been a
Great
while.
to be with you. Great to be with you.
Over a year. I think the last time we had you on was in September of 23, but looking up before we started, I realized you've been on about 7 times over the past 8 years. I don't think we've had any more frequent special guests. So thank you for making the time for being with us again today.
I am flattered and figure it's a good sign if you want to have me back on. So happy
Absolutely.
to be here.
Well, you bring to the table expertise and knowledge and interest in an area that I think is very important, particularly as we sit here on with about a week to go before the presidential election, the whole issue of rural economies, rural states trying to kind of I'm not sure if keep up is the right word, but to grow and prosper and thrive. Uh, as we reflect back on the presidential campaign, which will be hopefully ending soon. I mean, that whole rural-urban divide has been one of the themes, though, you think that we've been hearing a lot about, and from some folks living in those rural areas, rural states, what seemed to me at least, and you may wish to correct me on this, and feel free, this sort of sense of, I don't know, grievance is one term that's come up, that rural areas have been left behind compared to more the urban metropolitan areas in terms of economic growth and prosperity. I mean, we see a lot of younger folks moving out of rural areas, moving to cities where there seem to be more job opportunities, and your work in CORI has focused a lot around high tech industries. Um, so I guess I just thought maybe to get us started here, I wanted to ask you kind of a broad question about do you feel that sense of grievance is justifiable? Is that indeed what you're seeing going on? That rural areas in general, and not all, but maybe by and large, uh, have a good case to say, hey, we've been left behind. There hasn't been the same investment that we've seen in other parts of the country, and that's a problem. Is that what you're seeing as you go around talking to folks?
So it is what I'm seeing, and it is changed over a period of time. Certainly, the pandemic opened, I think, a lot of people's aperture of where people and talented folks and aspirational folks could live, and where startups and other kinds of innovation based companies could take place. But I would say that the issue these days is less around just completely ignoring rural places, but making assumptions about rural places and their potential. I think the wake-up call that we had to actually pay attention to, the 20% of the nation's population that represents 80% of our nation's landmass is important. But there are some ongoing biases that keep emerging about what people in rural places could do. And the assumption is that it's about farming, or that it's just people who are out there who all they could do was work in an assembly line. And there's nothing wrong with working in an assembly line, and God knows farming is critical, and you can really only do it in rural places. But the notion that you could be in a rural place and start a company that could impact global markets, or you could be someone who has the tools of a of the high-paying tech sector, and that you could do that kind of work in a rural place, has been challenging for folks. And I think that that sense that if you live in a rural place that somehow you can't code, or you're stuck there and the only reason you're in that place is because you couldn't get out. I think that is gets to more of the heart of the anger and pushback from rural people. It's less about necessarily, the economy or the quality of life is better or worse. I think most rural people say we're living in a rural place because we love to be there. It's the it's the disrespect, and sometimes with an air of condescension, that I think really starts to irk people and makes them want to push back and to push back really hard. So that's what we're after. We're not only after helping make sure that there are quality jobs and economies for the future in every micropolitan place around the country. And as we've discussed before, there was just a massive divide that emerged after the 2008 recession, where urban economies came roaring right back, in rural places not so much. And if you dig into the roots of that, it was the winners and losers of the tech economy and automation, where the tech economy created millions of jobs and automated lots of things. It also removed a lot of jobs. The problem is it completely created those jobs in urban places, almost completely removed them in rural. And that's because there had become an overdependency in rural communities for tradable goods sectors, where you would make a physical thing and then you would export that out and you'd get paid for it and cash would come in. And unfortunately, the growth since 2008 has been in tradable services, have been in those areas that facilitate non-physical goods as part of their economy. And that can be banking and finance, that can be consulting, and that can be tech. And so you saw this divide happen at a really rapid rate, especially in the context of an economy. And things then followed on. Newspapers went under because there wasn't the base to be able to support it. Hospital pair mixes got worse and worse and worse. So you saw this Armageddon of rural hospitals, and you saw the response from policymakers and others that were still couched in sort of a 1975 view of the economy of a rural place, rather than saying, hey, there is likely in the age of the internet the ability to tap into incredible talent and entrepreneurs in those rural places, either who are still there and choose to be there, or folks who have moved home. And that's what we're working really hard to capture. But with that is also the respect that comes with that, the understanding that you don't have to leave the place you love in order to have an aspirational career, or that your kid does, right? And that's where it really is painful. And then the assumptions that come in from folks who are not from rural places of, oh, they're going to have everything solved because we're going to build solar panels and wind turbines in rural America. Isn't that great, Matt? To which my response is, for the planet, absolutely, right? It's how we're going to prevent the existential threat of climate change and all of that. But to believe that that's going to create the kinds of jobs that will be able to sustain people in those areas and import cash while exporting value is just not the case. We have to be thinking more holistically and optimistically about what it is that rural people can provide in the innovation economy.
So, what do you think needs to happen to kind of rebalance all of that? I mean, is it going to take sort of active government intervention in the form of, let's say, of incentives of one sort or another? I mean, the Biden administration seemed to be trying to do that with legislation like the CHIPS Act and the somewhat misnamed Inflation Reduction Act, which really was more about investing in manufacturing opportunities around the country.
Hmm?
Uh, is it going to require an active role for the government, or is it a case where the private sector could see, oh, wait a minute, it's going to be cheaper to build this over here in the middle of Nebraska or wherever, or Vermont, than it might be in Midtown Manhattan?
So I think there's going to be a couple things that need to happen, and certainly there's a government role. I mean, there's the state table stakes, which is making sure you've got equalizing infrastructure, and in today's era, that means broadband. And the Congress, through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, passed $42 billion to once and for all be able to allow for every rural place to be connected to the internet. Whether that money is going to actually solve all of that, we have a good shot in Vermont because we were so far ahead of the curve in organizing and figuring out the strategies. Um, but it really will create a level playing field where that's no longer the barrier, just like rural electrification leveled the playing field about 100 years ago to allow for rural manufacturers and other kinds of businesses to be able to participate. The second part is going to be a function of investment of resources that can also come from the federal government. The Economic Development Administration has a number of programs that are intended to help spur innovation economies. The Build to Scale program is sort of the signature one they have. And they started a couple of years ago really focusing on making sure that those resources were not just going to the big tech centers or large cities, but actually going to rural micropolitan areas that had the ingredients to be able to create smaller versions, but innovation hubs of a kind that have a four-year college and university that's got already a couple of tech companies that can be built upon and leveraged to be able to create other kinds of capacity. And it's all for the broadband itself. And then the final piece is a shift in the narratives that the private sector has about where these kinds of companies and jobs can take place. And as I mentioned before, COVID really helped that in opening people's aperture to where that kind of talent could reside. And we're seeing it reflected in some of the numbers. The amount of venture capital going to rural zip codes grew by 300% since 2017. It wasn't all in one year. It was, over a period of time. It's still less than 2% of all venture capital going to those zip codes. So we've got a ways to go, but that is a real change in the kind of capital which isn't everything, right? There's some challenges with venture capital, but it is a facilitator of particular kinds of companies that are IP based, that are technology based, and that have the potential to scale and grow and generate wealth in today's economy. So those are the kinds of things that we're seeing both on the federal government participation side, as well as what the marketplace is starting to do and needs to do more of. And that's the exciting part of our work is that we're not only out there helping these communities who've said, yes, please, we want to build a tech economy to get the resources they can stand up tech accelerators and tech talent development programs and physical incubator co-work spaces. But we also have a seed fund that invests in early stage tech company in rural places. And we've been pretty successful with finding these companies that are ready to make an impact in the world with their products and their ingenuity. So we're feeling more optimistic about that, especially with the investments that have been made by the Biden administration over the last year, and we're going to hopefully be able to continue that momentum.
And just to kind of bring it home, are we seeing some of the uh, fruits of that happening here in Vermont? I mean, we have a bit of a high-tech sector, particularly it seems to be concentrated pretty much in Chittenden County, I guess, around UVM and the other research institutions. But are you seeing signs that, yes, the high-tech economy that would bring good jobs and opportunities for particularly younger folks? Yeah, it's coming here.
Yeah, no, we are seeing early signs. And, just like with other states, right? In Iowa, the concentration of tech jobs are in Des Moines, right? Which is one of the bigger cities. In Vermont, it's in Burlington, which, by the way, 15 years ago, people would say, oh, Burlington's too small to have a tech economy. Well, turns out not so much. I think like a couple $1 billion exits for people to change their mind about what's possible in a city the size of Burlington. But we're seeing some really exciting movement in Vermont, some of which have come from the local leaders in the regions, the economic development leaders who are looking for different pathways forward. Also, the state has stepped up to help out with communities that are applying for federal dollars, offering match. And the Vermont Community Foundation has actually been a real leader in saying we get that we need to create a pool of funds to support that technical assistance so that smaller communities that haven't applied for these large federal grants before can do so and have a strategy that's actionable. And that combination of the public and private philanthropy sector is pretty exciting to see happen in Vermont. So there are now tech accelerators in Randolph, Rutland, and Springfield, and one on the way in Linden, Vermont, which is nodes, right? Traditionally economic centers, but also have higher education assets as well as other kinds of capacity that they can build on. And then in addition to our national seed fund, we were able to secure, with the support of the state, a $3 million allocation from a special U.S. Treasury program to provide really early stage investment for rural startups in Vermont. So we are working with founders who might have their first product, maybe their first contract that can show that it can actually work. And we're providing that first 50, 75, $100,000 check that they need to match one to one at the deal level. But that early stage funding in a place that doesn't have a mature tech economy is super hard to come by. So what we're seeing are these incredible founders from different corners of rural Vermont, basically anywhere but Chittenden County, that are bringing these ideas to market. We're able to make that investment, and we're seeing them be able to bring on follow-on investment as they're moving forward with their businesses. So those two things together are pretty exciting, and we're going to test the thesis with the Green Mountain Accelerator Fund of whether or not in a rural place you can surcharge a group of founders who otherwise wouldn't have the friends and family to be able to support that early stage and allow a more diverse set of founders to be actually able to get to seed stage and to scale their companies in the place that they love.
So, when you come over here to Manchester on November 6th and give your talk at the New Lincoln Hall at Hildene, without giving us a spoiler alert or whatever, what are some of the topics or themes you're going to be discussing during that keynote address?
So what I was asked to talk about, which was interesting, is models for nonprofit organizations or social enterprises to affect change. And that's a subject that I'm pretty passionate about from my days at AmeriCorps Vista or trying to do public-private partnerships as a state legislator. Uh, but it's also what we've been experimenting with the Center on Rural Innovation. It's not every day that you have a nonprofit who's doing work that's clearly philanthropic because it's not things that the market is going to do on its own, but also is doing work with companies on developing new tools for data and insight, all the way through having an investment vehicle like the CORI Innovation Fund, and where the half of the carry from the fund, which is the upside, if it's a successful fund, comes back to the 501(c)(3) nonprofit to help eventually create a flywheel to be able to support on an ongoing basis the communities that are doing this work. We also have a membership organization in the middle of this, which is the Rural Innovation Network, which are the communities that we've worked with, gotten them started on their journey. And then they said, we want a community of practice. We want to be able to connect to other people who are crazy enough to think that we can start a tech economy in a town of 15,000, 20,000 people. And so we got that up and running as well. And in some ways, the synergy that comes out of that ecosystem is as powerful as anything we're coming up with, from our perch of expertise, whatever that is. So what I'm going to do is sort of walk through what the social enterprise looks like, how we arrived at the structure for it, and how eventually it should be able to create a longer term sustainable support organization for rural communities trying to transform their economic futures.
I wanted to ask you what your sense is of how rural broadband is going. In many of the newsletters that Corey publishes that I've been able to read, that seems to be something you're looking at fairly closely, and at this point it's about as obvious as anything can be that high capacity broadband capability is really critical for any kind of economic growth. Say nothing of education and healthcare and a whole bunch of other sectors. Um, but I just wondered if you're seeing, again, and looking nationally now for a moment, if rural sectors are seeing kind of that growth in broadband capacity that, well, the parallel that's often mentioned is rural electrification that took place in the 1930s or so when rural areas finally got electric wiring. Are we seeing a similar development and growth happening by and large across the rural areas of the country, or is that still, maybe getting better, but still a long way from where it needs to be?
So what's interesting is that you have seen some responsiveness. You have seen uh, uh, rural areas start to build out their fiber to the home networks in particular, which is really exciting because that's your future-proof solution. And that's with the early money that came out of the infrastructure bill and other efforts coming out of COVID to try to make sure that there was equal footing. But a vast majority of those dollars are allocated, but they have not yet been deployed. So, in many ways, the best is yet to come. Now, in the infinite wisdom that Congress had, they decided to not do it on a centralized deployment basis, but to actually provide those resources through states. And the good news on that, as a recovering state legislator, is that that state should know its nuances and players and potential partners better than anyone at the federal level, and can then deploy those dollars more effectively and appropriately. What it also does is sometimes put different states on different timelines. Over half of the states in the country didn't have a broadband office before the BEAD funding was launched. So there wasn't an entity like there has been in Vermont that was thinking about how do we do this deployment, and if we had a significant amount of money, how would we deploy it? Creating entities like the communication union districts that Vermont has pioneered as a way to create regionalism and collaboration around deploying this kind of infrastructure. And so other states, unfortunately, are just getting started and are finally figuring out how they want to deploy the funds, what they're going to use as criteria. We've been working with communities on the ground to help them navigate and understand what is the appropriate way for them to do that deployment, what kind of partners are going to serve them in their best interest for the long term. In many cases, it's cooperative and municipal electric companies that were created to bridge the electric divide that are now in an ideal position to be able to solve for the digital divide. So we're working with a lot of different entities like that, as well as small internet service providers that believe they can come in and really make a difference in building out fiber to the home. So the answer is lots of great progress, lots of educating, and the best is yet to come. And I think we will see that massive transformation over the next 2 years as that $42 billion is deployed and actually connecting people. The other challenge is that there is materials that are necessary to do that. In particular, fiber optic cable, and there are only a few producers of that. So there are some issues with supply chain that we need to acknowledge up front. But the good news is that companies like Corning and others have see the money coming and have ramped up their supply capability to be able to meet this moment. But if you look in Vermont, the southern tier has actually seen a huge increase in the total coverage, partially because of the partnership they established with the existing telephone company that was willing to deploy it quickly, but also because Vermont was prepared. So they were able to take those first tranches of money that came in ahead, get them out the door, and start getting those trucks rolling to bring fiber to the home in places like Wilmington and other areas that really had terrible broadband for a long time. So we've got those great stories up front. Northeast Kingdom, it's going to be on a longer trajectory. There are many, many more challenges in the deployment, and they're looking to a model that will create a bit more agency for the communities in the long term. That just means a more complicated partnership structure, but it's coming, and it's exciting to see that rollout happen.
In the minute or two that we have left, I just wanted to ask you about that communications union district model that we have established here in Vermont. I mean, from my perspective, it seems like that's working fairly well. Are there any other states that are trying that approach, or is it kind of are they going in a different direction than that? Because
So it's a pretty unique thing to Vermont. I mean, there are other models that are similar to it. One of the things that Vermont was trying to solve for was that we really don't have county government. I mean, we have side judges, and there's a little bit of resources that are there. But that makes coordination on a kind of infrastructure build that crosses over towns by design a little harder. And so you have regional planning commissions that sometimes can fill that in, or regional economic development districts. But the communication union districts were really that effort to allow for collaboration on a regional basis that was necessary to do it. In other states, it's been county governments that have been taking the lead, or they've been leaving it to the footprint of a particular, small telephone company that might be the applicant and the participant, or an electric cooperative that might have a very sprawling, multi-county territory where they're now becoming the internet service provider, or they're becoming the owner of the fiber infrastructure and then contracting with an internet service provider to actually administer it because they say, we know about electricity customers. We don't know as much about telecom. And so you're seeing just about as many different variations of collaboration as you can probably imagine. But it is complicated in the places that don't have a dedicated structure for being able to do that planning to get to the last mile, which is one of the parts of the BEAD money is that you can't just cherry pick where you want to go. The whole point of this is to actually provide democratized access to broadband for the long term. And that becomes hard if you have different applicants coming from different areas, some of which may be overlapping with each other, and broadband offices have to pull that apart. I was talking to the head of the broadband office in Texas, and you can only imagine beyond just the fascinating set of interests that are coming into play in a state like that, but just the vast geography that they're trying to address and in a way that is, logical and hopefully efficient.
Mm. Well, boy, that's all and super interesting, Matt. And we could probably talk for another half an hour about some of the intricacies of all of this, but I guess we'll have to leave it there for today. But let's before we have to run, I was mentioned again, Matt's going to be speaking at Lincoln Hall at Hildene in Manchester this coming Wednesday, November 6th at 12. And you can still get tickets by going to the Southwestern Vermont Chamber of Commerce website. The Southwestern Vermont Chamber is the organizer and host for the event, so they made a great choice by having Matt come and give the keynote address for this luncheon. Well,
The
Matt,
only other thing I would just also add is that we have our national pitch competition, where all of the communities in the network actually bring forward their best startups. We're actually doing in person this year, and it's going to be at Dartmouth College on November 13th. Highly recommend people come to see it. It's going to be a really, really fun and exciting event. You'll get to see some of the best of innovators around rural America, and there is a $10,000 prize for the winner of it. So encourage people to come join us at Dartmouth College on November 13th in the evening.
all right. Well, once again, Matt, thank you very much for making the time for this conversation. Really appreciate it. I know it's a busy schedule you've got going on, so thank you for making the time. And I look forward to hearing your talk up at Hildene then on November 6th. And thanks to all of you who've been with us and for sharing part of your day with us. Hope you found the program interesting. And well, we'll see you again the next time. Take care.